And we have dramatic news in the high-profile case of NXIVM, the self-help group that was exposed as a sex cult. Self-help guru and the leader of NXIVM, Keith Raniere, was sentenced today to 120 years in federal prison. Victim impact statements lasted for hours today in court in Brooklyn, New York. The 60-year-old Raniere was convicted last summer on charges of racketeering, sex trafficking of children, extortion, and conspiracy to commit forced labor. CourtTV special contributor Ashley Banfield has been covering this case. She joins us now. Wow, what a day.
What a day indeed, and what a painful day for some of the people, Vinny, who went into that court to give victim impact statements. And that's sometimes the most dramatic moment in the court process, because that's what justice is all about, right? This is the end of the process for them, hopefully. Closure, maybe not, but at least justice, and they get to be a part of it. And so for a lot of those victims today, it was gut-wrenching. The stories of three sisters who were all impregnated by this man, and all forced to have abortions. One of them chose to go ahead and have a child with Keith Raniere, but the father of those three sisters is still a Keith Raniere supporter. It's hard to even say that, but that tells you the hold that that man had over the 17,000 plus members that were at one point a part of the NXIVM group. One of those members who rose very high in the ranks is a young woman by the name of Sarah Edmondson. And she is the star of the HBO series, The Vow. She's also one of the first top members to turn against this cult and work with the FBI to investigate Raniere and the others, and eventually lead to the day we had today, 120-year sentence. And I had the exclusive opportunity to speak with Sarah just a little over an hour ago to get her reaction, not only to that walloping sentence, but everything else about this story. Here's our conversation. Tell me your reaction, 120 years.
You know, the first person who messaged me said that all they texted was 120. So I thought, is that months? And I tried to do the math, and then I realized it was 120 years. I didn't even know that was possible. I was just hoping for life in prison. So, and obviously it means the same thing. It's just the magnitude of what the judge recognizes Keith deserves really hit me.
Were you surprised?
Yes, I was surprised. Absolutely. Surprised, relieved, safe, feel so much safer. I feel like everyone just breathed the collective sigh of relief.
You had a chance to give a victim's impact statement in court by a teleconference from Canada. Did you feel justice?
I did.
There's no closure, but did you feel justice?
100%. And actually, my statement was, I pre-recorded it. So I sent a video that I made a couple weeks ago. And it's not perfect, but I spoke from the heart, and I got to say to Keith what I haven't had the chance to say all these years since I left. And among other things, I said that this was not a victim impact statement, it was a survivor statement, and that he was not my guru, he's not my coach, not my leader, but he was and continues to be a parasite, a grifter, and a liar. And I really felt, for me, the closure that I got to say, this is who you really are, and we all see through that, and that feels really good for me.
How do you think he's taking the words that were spoken to him in court? Do you think anything's getting through to him?
He's a sociopathic, narcissistic sex addict. He doesn't see the world in the way that normal people do. In fact, he taught us in the curriculum how sociopaths operate. He doesn't feel. He just pretends to feel. He thinks he's innocent. He can't see what he's done and how he's hurt people. Now he's starting to take responsibility because he has to. But he says that he feels, he says that he takes that responsibility even though we're lying in our impact statements. So it's like, really, when you take responsibility, you go, oh, that's your truth. How did I cause that? It's like a faux responsibility. It's not real.
Did you find it surprising at all that leading up to the sentencing, he was still obstinate about not only just what he says is his innocence, but also that the justice system was somehow rigged against him, and that he was trying to commission people to ferret out dirt, threatening that the judge would be watched? I mean, did any of this stuff surprise you?
No, in fact, it's kind of typical of what sociopaths do. They're taking people's mind and their eyes off the content of the details and going to the process and saying the process is flawed. It's gaslighting. He's actually gaslighting the justice system, and so it wasn't surprising. I mean, it's offensive. It's embarrassing. It doesn't bode well for him when getting sentenced, obviously, because the judge had none of that. But not surprising, kind of typical sociopathic playbook.
Not always a great idea either to upset the judge who's about to, hand down your sentence.
Not the smartest man in the world after all, right?
So that's interesting, but yet he still seems to have a hold over people. There were about a dozen people who showed up at the courthouse to support him. Nikki Klein brought cameras. What do you make of that?
Well, it shows the level and the extent to which people aren't willing to admit that they're wrong. And it's a hard sandwich to take a bite out of when you've gone this far, moved to Albany, given up your life and your dreams to follow someone, to admit, oh my gosh, I've been duped. I've been conned by this man. It's easier to go, no, he's innocent. I made good life choices. It's pride. Pride is a hard thing to get over, and it shows the extent to which they're indoctrinated. They're indoctrinated to believe that all of this is a smear campaign, and it's too hard to admit you're wrong at that point.
So do you think he still is going to be able to hold sway over people sitting in a cell?
I don't think so. I mean, I did read that he's not allowed to have contact with anybody who's affiliated with NXIVM. So there's going to be no letter writing, no more emails, no more, poetry exchanged. I don't think that people are going to see him as a, somebody they want to be friends with. I don't really know much about how has been treated so far in prison, but I can't imagine he's going to have a enjoyable existence.
One of the victim impact statements today came from a young woman named Cammie, who is 30 years old now, and says that at age 15, she had sex with Keith Raniere, as did her two sisters. She said they were impregnated, they were forced to have abortions. I mean, it just sounded apocalyptic. And yet her father, the father of three girls, whom Keith impregnated, still supports him. How is it possible?
Honestly, I don't know. I think they're so lost and so brainwashed, for lack of a better word, that Keith is good. It's so hard to make that switch from Keith is good to Keith is bad. And again, the father is protecting his self-image. He's got to see himself as a good dad. It's going to be a hard one to go, wow, I really screwed up. And did he really screw up by letting his three young daughters be coached by Keith? And in my heart, if Cammie's watching this, and my heart goes out to her, I had no idea that was going on while I was there. And it's heartbreaking.
I think so many people would say they could understand the beginnings of being pulled into someone so persuasive, but they would be unable to fathom how a father could be okay with any part of three daughters being impregnated by the same man. Like, it doesn't compute.
No,
can you see how in some way, given the power that he had over so many people, that it could compute for him?
The only thing I could think of, if I imagine being Hector is his name, that he would have to think that that's all lies. Most of the rebuttal to this stuff for people who are still loyal to Keith is that what we're saying, anyone on the outside, anyone who's woken up, that we're lying. They're just like, well, it's just not true. We're just making it up. So I can only imagine that the father hasn't come to terms with the fact that their daughters did that even happened.
What do you think is in store for Nancy Salzman and Lauren Salzman and Allison Mack and Kathy Russell?
I don't know. I don't know enough about this legal system. I've heard that they have indeed woken up, but I just hope that they can heal and move on with their lives from, this has been a nightmare for everybody. Nobody signed up for this. So I hope that's the case for them.
So, I mean, we were all pretty shocked watching Claire Bronfman show up for her sentencing. The prosecutors asked for 5 years. The judge handed down almost 7. And it was just sort of a real eye-opener for what the others might expect. Do you think that they could suffer the same fate?
I really don't think they had the same or they should have the same consequences personally.
Do you think Claire's money just made it so much worse for so many people?
Yeah. And
Far-reaching.
Nancy and Lauren are going to have a different type of reconciliation for what they did as leaders.
And then there's just the whole notion in justice of, you know, mea culpa, you know, being sorry. Do you feel that the others have had an appropriate level of that?
Oh, I haven't had enough contact with them to know. I've heard that they are aware that they were conned and that Keith is a sociopath, but I don't know if they have had enough mea culpa to realize what they've done to others as well and how they're going to reconcile their own participation. I don't know. We can't have contact until all this is done.
It's odd to think that only Nancy Salzman testified against him and the others cut deals but did not. It makes me wonder, you know, where is Allison Mack's head, you know, in the midst of all of this? Is she going along with what justice requires, or does she truly feel as though, my God, where was my life and how could I have been that person and I'm a different person now? What's your sense? If you have one, I mean,
I don't know. I like I said, we had no contact, but I have heard that when the charges about the underage sex came through in the affidavits that were filed by the prosecution, and it's just completely anecdotal, I heard that was her wake up. People have different wake ups at different times. As you said, some people still haven't woken up, and eventually I hope they will. They may never. If they're not awake with so much data in front of them saying this is what Keith did, and they're saying lies, 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 smear campaign, tampered evidence. I mean, it's typical strategy to not take in the truth. And that's what people do who are sociopaths. That's how a gaslighter works. It attacks the process, not the content itself.
Pretty amazing stuff that Sarah Edmondson has to say. And she's written a lot of this in a very therapeutic way for her in a book entitled Scarred, the true story of how I escaped NXIVM, the cult that bound my life. So she can add author now to actress, and then hopefully former long ago former cult member. You can see on the book jacket there, she shows the scar, the physical scar that she got from the branding that so many of those young women who were swept up into the DOS secret subculture cult within NXIVM. It's just a really unbelievable story. And, you know, even today, India Oxenberg, the daughter of Catherine Oxenberg, India struggled for years within that cult, her mom trying to get her out of that cult. She talked about that same brand on her skin that she feels she'll have forever. And in court, Vinny, she said, I hope that Keith gets a forever punishment too. So India Oxenberg got what she wanted today too in that 120-year sentence. And there's the picture of her leaving the New York courthouse, the federal courthouse, earlier today. She had given that statement in person. So she's been traveling, you know, from California to do this, to make this appearance in that courtroom today. So that's extraordinary. She's really been through a lot. Her mother and her both. If you're a fan of The Vow, you probably know a lot of this because it's so detailed, the story that they all went through. But Vinny, after the break, I got a couple more things that I want to share with you that Sarah talked to me about, not the least of which is the communication from jail that this guy has had, a podcast that he's doing because he's got these people so wound around his little finger that they will agree to call, you know, to take these phone calls with him and record and then put out these podcasts. One of them is called The Devil, Hitler, and Lady Justice. I mean, have you ever heard of anything like this?
It's unreal.
Continuing this.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, you know how many years it took me to get a podcast? And this guy, you know, sex cult, in jail, he gets a podcast. Unbelievable.
Yeah,
All right.
I know.
This is fascinating stuff because these cult stories, you always look at them and you're like, how could that happen? And now we're finding out how it could happen.
Yeah. Sarah's got a lot more to tell you, too.
And the scary thing is we know it's going to happen again to someone else in some other situation. All right. We're going to have part 2 of Ashley's incredible interview when we come back.
And I used to give an example with respect to the Holocaust and having a magic wand. And suppose everyone in the world and all the literature all the Holocaust information was completely purged from it. No one had ever heard of it, no one knew of it, no one knew of any of the effects. And then I could go around with my magic wand, and when I tap someone on the head, suddenly they know all of what happened. Would I change the world by tapping people on the head? Of course I would.
That's Keith Raniere. Today he was sentenced in federal court to 120 years behind bars in federal prison for running a sex cult and abusing underage victims. It was horrific what he did. And tonight, a special detailed look at what was taking place. Ashley Banfield, CourtTV special contributor, back with us, did an incredible interview with one of his victims and has more for us, including some information about a podcast that this man was doing from behind bars.
If you can believe it. First, though, Vinny, I bet you're not surprised, though, about the 120 years. Like, think about it. You're a former prosecutor, and when you hear about people who take pot shots at the prosecutors, pot shots at the judge, pot shots at the system, and say words like this, you ready? This judge needs to know he's being watched. Did you... Are you the least bit surprised that that judge didn't say, I'm sorry, what? 120 years, right?
Yeah, you're not getting the benefit of any doubt there. And, you know, in the federal system, there's, you know, there are guidelines and you're going to get hammered anyway. But judges do have some level of discretion. And trust me, my dad was a federal judge. He would have done the same thing.
Right. And it's not even out of retribution. Honestly, that's not what I mean at all.
No,
What I
it's
really
not
mean
retribution.
is that,
it's handing down justice.
And he was doing these things because he was asking former members from his jail cell to dig up dirt on the prosecutors and the judge and the process. And I'm going after these guys. And that's probably why the judge also thought, you are a continuing danger. You're even dangerous where you are, let alone out, you know, on the street. And, you know, to that end as well, he was asking people to dig up dirt, and he was going to award them a $25,000 cash prize if they could get good stuff on these prosecutors and the judge. So yeah, maybe no surprise that the hammer came down hard on Keith Raniere. But Vinny, you're right. Even though he's stuck in a cell awaiting the sentencing today and got it, he's been like manipulating former members who are still in the tank to record his voice on these phone calls so that he can release podcasts, one of them with this really crazy name, The Devil, Hitler, and Lady Justice, or something to that effect. But here's a sampling of some of I mean, listen, I'm going to go there, garbage that he's releasing from his cell. Have a listen.
In this case, and, you know, there are people who dislike me for all sorts of reasons, and probably a lot of them valid. Most of the ones I've seen are not valid, but there's certainly a lot of reasons someone could not like someone like me. But as much as I might be disliked, when something is not valid under the law, that is something that is far more atrocious than whatever people might think of me. You know, in my case, not only do I believe I'm innocent, and all the people that I've had analyze the case believe I'm innocent.
Well, there are tens of thousands of people who don't. People who, you know, used to be, you know, your devotees, Keith, and that's the reality. And I actually spoke with one of those followers who's a former follower, Sarah Edmondson. And you probably recognize her name if you're a fan of HBO's The Vow, because she was a member of Keith Raniere's cult. She was a rising member. She was in the executive level. She recruited people. She was all in until she started to wake up and realize that she needed to be all out and, you know, enlist the help of the police and the FBI to investigate. She's written a spectacular book of her account called Scarred, the true story of how I escaped NXIVM, the cult that bound my life, in which she shows you, she's demonstrating the physical scar, the brand, the initials, KR, Keith Raniere, that he, you know, had branded into these members of this secret sex cult within the cult called DOS, Dominus Obsequious Sororium. And she spoke at length, not only in her book, but also in court today, about what this cult did to her, what innocence it took from her, what life it took from her husband, from her family, from her friends, effectively what Keith Raniere had over her. And to the friendships This is really important. These were the most important people of each other's lives. And now poof, it's gone. So I asked Sarah a couple things about those 17,000 members and how many are still in the tank for Keith, but also how many people she'd really still like to have in her life and who she's not allowed to have in her life. Here's the rest of our conversation.
17,000 members, in total over the decade plus of his reach.
Mm.
How many of those people do you think are still in his grip?
I would say less than 50. As you know, there's the NXIVM 5 that are public, and we know of a handful more. I'd say 20, 30, probably 50 though that aren't awake yet, max. He really, and even of those 50, they're not even aware of how many people who've left, because a lot of people who left are private about it and they don't want to deal with any of this energy and have moved on with their lives. The remaining few have no idea how alone and honestly how stupid they look to the rest of the world, because they haven't woken up yet. Everyone's just waiting for them to have that moment of, oh my goodness, I'm in a cult and everyone else was right. That's hard.
So today, while it should feel very final, I mean, hearing that someone's going to be put away for life should feel really final. Is there a strain of worry that still exists with someone like Keith, given that he still has sway over, my God, even upwards of 50 people? Is there some kernel of worry that you still hold that he could still do something or affect you in some way?
A little bit. If I think about it, I try not to think about it. What's good to remember is that they've all taken their own person. Well, I can't speak for all of them, but being in NXIVM, there was this notion of a vow of nonviolence. So I feel like if they were to do anything, it would have to be, verbal. And I can handle that.
The nonviolence. I mean, it's hard to believe it wasn't violent. I mean, I think of emotional torture as as violent as the scars that you received. In fact, that's what your book is titled, Scarred: The True Story of How I Escaped NXIVM, the Cult That Bound My Life. Was that cathartic for you to write that book? Did it help you get through the work that you needed to do to sort of shed that phase of your life?
Absolutely. It was very cathartic, and it was also stressful. I wrote it when I had a newborn, just because of the way the timing worked out. But it was really wonderful for me in terms of my own healing to say, this is what happened. This is how I got involved. This is how I got out. Especially I can't tell you what a relief it is to not have to answer the questions of how did you get involved and how did you miss the red flags and how did you get out and what was your wake up? Like, those questions are important, but I don't want to talk about it anymore. So now I can just give the book and people can read it. And there's also The Vow on HBO, which is a wonderful documentary about the more nuanced, look at how this happened, not just with me, but a number of other people. So these things exist out there and people can learn about it. They can have the template. And for me, that was the most cathartic, because I feel like I got involved in NXIVM to help people. Obviously, I bet on the wrong horse. And when I figured out that it was bad, I could use what I learned to help people get out. And then now helping people get out of different cults or different groups or different abusive relationships. So that process in terms of like fixing what I did with NXIVM feels very important to me.
How has life been since The Vow? Because that's really blown up pretty huge.
It's pretty huge. It's very strange. It seems like it's part of the zeitgeist of what people are watching, and that's very meaningful to me. That it's interesting, and that people relate to myself and the other people in it. That's important. I think it's a very well-made documentary, and it's important that especially young women watch it. And I'm getting a lot of feedback from around the world that it's having that impact. And again, helping people. I'm doing that. I'm fulfilling what's important to me.
The reach of the message is great, but you know how the internet is just so mean. I mean, how are you managing the naysayers and those who attack you? I mean, it's you're good at it. When anything's ever great and blows up big, it also blows up ugly.
Yeah, my husband always says, and he's been such a great support, that if you look at Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven YouTube, there's so many thumbs up, and there's always some thumbs down, and that's just the way it is. And I always laugh about that when I get some thumbs down, but I don't seek it out. People rarely come to my Instagram to tell me bad things. I get so much support and so much love from around the world. It fuels me, and it's affirming. And everyone else can, well, you know what they can do.
I think this is a really good example, and I'm going to use it if I can.
Please. Yeah,
Someone's
share
almost got a thumbs down to Stairway to Heaven. Who does that, right?
I know, the best song ever.
Right? You mentioned that you can't have contact right now, completely makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But I was very curious about those deep-rooted relationships that you once had. It's got to feel like a bit of a death or a loss not to have those relationships anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Do you intend to reach out or have communication or reconnect with any of those who were criminally processed, but also those who weren't?
I would like to have a conversation with both Nancy and Lauren and Allison, actually. I don't know if that'll be in person or through glass, but it's something I just don't like to have unresolved relationships with anybody or bad blood between people. Obviously, it's been many years, and that kind of rupture affects me. Yeah, I'd like to resolve it. The other people who've left, and many people have left NXIVM, haven't reached out to contact me, and I hope that they will one day. And when people wake up, it doesn't matter when or how, I'll always accept them back with loving arms, because it took me a long time to wake up, so I get it.
Would you ever want to have a conversation with Keith?
Nah.
You're good there. He's fine where he
I'm
is.
done. Yeah.
But he's doing this podcast thing
It's
called
not a
The
podcast. He's
Devil
getting a phone
Hunter,
call
Lady
recorded.
Justice? What is
Yeah.
it?
It's just his last ditch attempt to have people think he's maybe innocent. No, he's just getting people to record his phone calls and putting it up on podcasts.
And so as you move forward, does this go away? Do you now want nothing to do with this, or do you somehow incorporate this as a positive in your life? How do you accommodate for all of this that's happened?
You know, I'm not totally sure yet. I'm a bit of a crossroads. I know that I want to focus more on my family right now and maybe get back to my acting career. This world is something that's, I've learned a lot about. I've become an unofficial expert. I think I'll continue to help people and help women, be an advocate for them. But the cult world is very dark, and I've got to figure out how much of that I want in my life. But I feel like I threw my punch. I said what I had to say. I did my part, and I'm feeling pretty ready to move on now.
Any chance there might be actually a career for you in helping others who end up in that boat?
Yeah, it's possible. I haven't made that decision yet. I would go back and get a counseling degree or a psychotherapy degree if I was going to do that.
Pretty fascinating interview with someone who has, without question, been through a lot. Listen, Vinny, there's a couple more things, though, ahead. The story's not completely over. Sentencing still ahead for Allison Mack, the Smallville actress, as well as Nancy Salzman, who was the right-hand man for Keith Raniere, and her daughter, Lauren Salzman, and also Kathy Russell, the bookkeeper. So we've got some more coverage coming in the days and weeks ahead.
Awesome. Great stuff. Ashley Banfield, appreciate it.
Thanks.